Hey guys, it's Mary Kate, one of the leaders of CYAGD. Tyler, Lisa, and I were talking and decided we wanted to do a series of videos about either saints that we like or, are special to us in some way, but basically a short video about their life and why we like them. Don't know how often we're going to be posting these videos. Don't know if there's going to be a name to the series of videos. Personally, I like the name Saintly Tirades, but I haven't actually told my co-leaders about that yet. So that's just going to be what I call them for now. The first saint that I will be covering is probably also going to be the only or the most well-known saint that I'll be covering, since I'm probably a fan of just lesser-known saints, or I'd like to use this time to look up lesser-known saints. But I'm going to be covering my confirmation saint, Saint Brigid of Ireland. I say of Ireland because there's also Saint Brigid of Sweden. Apparently, I learned that in 8th grade during confirmation year. But St. Brigid of Ireland was born in Ireland at about 451 AD, lived to about 525 AD. She was the daughter of a nobleman and a slave who converted to Christianity and was actually baptized by St. Patrick. St. Patrick had been spreading Christianity earlier that century, in the earlier 400s. So, growing up, she was a very charitable child, always giving away possessions or her parents' possessions or food to the needy. When she became of a suitable age, her father wanted her to marry. She didn't want to marry. She wanted to become a nun. And so what ended up happening was she prayed to God to have her beauty taken away, since she was a very beautiful young woman at the time, and God answered her prayers. And I don't know how else to say it. She ended up, becoming disfigured and essentially unattractive. So her father allowed her to go off and study and become a nun. But while she was taking her final vows, though, at the end of saying her final vows to become a nun, God actually gave her back her beauty that he had taken away earlier, once the veil had been laid on her, which is a very nice story. There's also another story surrounding her final vows, saying that the ones she took weren't actually the ones to become a nun. She was given the version of final vows to become a priest, which I guess was on the bishop's part. But, and I should have warned you earlier, there isn't a lot of factual data about her, since she did live, 1,600 years ago. So most of the stuff surrounding her life is stories or myths, except for a few facts, which is basically what I've told you so far and what I'll tell you next. But yeah, because she took her final vows, which some say were the vows to become a priest, which is awesome. Or I think it's pretty cool. That's just me. Afterwards, she was a nun. She ended up eventually finding a monastery in Kildare, Ireland, which is also a name for Under the Oak. And that ended up going on to becoming a double monastery. You'd have your one for nuns, and then they had another one for priests. And so she was the abbess of, the nun side, and she recruited another, I guess, well-known saint of Ireland. I hadn't heard of him earlier, named Saint Conleth. He was a hermit and became the bishop abbot of the monastery. And fun fact, the double monastery she had, the abbess actually had the higher position out of the two. Between the abbess and the abbot, the abbess was higher, which is very unusual for the time. And I did find a few stories saying later on, after she found the monastery, she founded a school of art and illustration and some metalworking over in Kildare, which did produce a very beautiful book of its own called the Book of Kildare. It's exactly the same concept as what the Book of the Kells is, if anybody's heard of that, except it's called the Book of Kildare because it was produced in Kildare. Only problem is, about 300 years after it was created, it went missing and hasn't turned up since. But accounts say, claim it was painted. It was beautiful enough. It looks like it might have been painted by angels. So who knows? Maybe God took it back. We do know of a few miracles that she performed during her lifetime. One being that she prayed for a blind nun, a blind sister, to be able to see, and the sister was able to see, but she realized that with the granting of her sight, God actually seemed to be clouded, looking at him through the eye of the soul, so she prayed to be blind again, and got her wish there. Which I think is a neat little story. It was also said that she pulled, kind of like a Jesus, she turned beer or water into beer, and was able, from one barrel of beer, have enough for about 18. There's also a cross of St. Brigid that is associated with her. The story behind that creation is that she was called to the bedside of a sick chieftain, and taking some of the rush, which is like straw, off the floor, she started just bending and folding it into what's now known as the Cross of St. Brigid. You guys can go and Google that on your own time if you'd like. It's actually very nice. But she was just sitting there folding the rushes into the Cross of St. Brigid, and started talking to the chieftain about the basics of Christianity, since he was curious as to what she was doing. And by the end of their conversation, he wanted to convert to Christianity, which she obliged to do, and he passed away shortly thereafter. With that, in celebration of her feast day, which is February 1st, the people of Ireland gather rush and straw and make St. Bridget's crosses, which they hang into their house, because it's also said to repel evil, fire, and hunger out of the house that's hung in it. One last thing before I sign off, I probably should have said this at the beginning. St. Brigid is the patron saint of Ireland, along with Saints Patrick and Columba, who is another saint that most people haven't heard of, but she's also the patron saint of dairymaids, cattle, midwives, Irish nuns, and newborn babies.